Good afternoon. It's nice to be here. I'm Kathy Terrell from the University of Central Oklahoma. My team's here. We're proud of them this time. Shannon Warren asked me to address the guiding principle today, and I selected under responsibility to self and others, collaboration, where it defines members collaborate excuse me, by being constructively engaged in discussions regarding ethics. It seems a fitting topic since we're between the two competitions right now and ready to go to Texas. As our student just mentioned, there's a lot of work that goes into this. Students, coaches, and advisors spend 7 to 8 weeks reading and studying and researching, analyzing, strategizing, and practicing to participate in these activities. These debates require students not only to argue the ethical arguments and the ethical implications of the situations posed by each of the cases, but to derive ethical solutions for them. Solutions are tough, okay? Judges also spend a lot of time learning about the cases and applying their understanding of ethics and justice to those same cases. When we meet together, the exchange of ideas can be electrifying. The judges and moderators learn from the students. The students and coaches learn from the judges and the moderators. Some aha moments happen. These questions are difficult, and I would doubt that any of the participants leave the venue without learning something. These are difficult topics. I'll give you 4 of the ones we've had to do this time. Does a child have a right to die? Should parents who smoke in a car with children present be fined? Can it be ethical for an animal from an endangered species to be hunted to raise money to protect their breed? And one of them was really hard. Should a dying child be granted a wish costing thousands of dollars when children around the world are starving? These take a lot of analysis to work with. I would guess that many of you would have differing views on these topics, and we call this discourse in a marketplace of ideas. As one of those coaches, I want to thank the members of the OK Ethics and the Educational Foundation for providing these opportunities for all involved. If you have not considered participating, I would assure you that you would gain something out of doing so. I would promise you that you would leave with more than you arrived. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dr. Ron Paul Hill. Dr. Hill is the Richard J. and Barbara Naclerio Chairholder of Business and Professor of Marketing at Villanova University. Dr. Hill is globally recognized for his unique and engaging style of presentation on issues that include professional ethics, compassionate leadership, and intergenerational management. His understanding of generational differences and his recommendations for leading the Z generation are impressive, and his message is powerful. In his 35-year career as a professor, he has been named one of the most prolific and influential authors in the field of marketing, with over 200 articles, review papers, and books that examine business ethics, public policy, and basic human rights. 2 of his works, Pearls Along the Path, Lessons for Living a Life with Passion, and Surviving in a Material World, The Lived Experience of People in Poverty, prompted the United Nations to select him to speak on behalf of disadvantaged consumers at universities and corporations around the country. On this very cold day, please, let's give a warm Oklahoma welcome to Dr. Ron Paul Hill.
Thank you so much. You know, this is my first time speaking in Antarctica, and I really want to tell you, it's a deep pleasure. I was in Tulsa giving a talk in July, and the topography is amazingly similar. I just don't know what the real difference is here, other than the fact that it's obviously much colder than you had expected. My name is Ron Hill, and I've been called Ron Paul a lot lately. I'm not exactly sure what that means about my politics, but it does mean that my son was named Paul. We decided to name him Paul, and so I use Ronald Paul Hill a lot because of that. You know, I've had an opportunity to speak in front of a lot of groups over time, And I want to take an opportunity to give you some of that accumulated wisdom. This year is a very special year for me. I turned 60 years old in a month. I've been married 30 years as of September, and I completed my doctorate 30 years ago in July. So you would hope that I would have some accumulated wisdom to give you today. So let me take an opportunity then to give you some idea about what we're going to talk about today. First of all, the title is not misleading. By that I mean it's actually worth reading and thinking about. We start with the idea of understanding and measuring your ethical competency. It begins with understanding. If you really feel you understand that moral compass that guides you or guides your organization, then you're a rare individual. It's truly understanding that. And how do you measure it? As an organization, how do you measure whether the individual is acting ethically or not? For many of us, when I ask you what ethics are, they'll say, well, it tells me something about how to behave or how to be good. That doesn't tell us very much, does it? You know, recently I heard a commentator ask a person who was in a state and he wanted to display the 10 Commandments. And the individual said to him, if you want to display them, you must know them very well. And he goes, of course, I've lived by the credo my entire life. And so the commentator then just said, could you name them for me? And he stopped, and he hesitated, and he couldn't come up with one. Now you would assume that, you know, just by happenstance you could pick up 3, right? But he could not name one. Now I'm not saying the person wasn't ethical or moral. I'm just saying in order to be competent ethically, you have to be able to do better than that. So I'm going to take you on a journey. And by the way, continue to drink, eat, text under the table, look sleepy, and occasionally do this. And I'll feel right at home. So I'm trying to move my... Of course, turning it on you think would make a difference? So far not. You know, these are those... Oh, there we go. We got a blank page. So there's my ethics. Thank you very much. No. Okay. So I'm going to take you on a bit of a journey. First of all, we're going to talk about measuring competence, and we're going to go through 3 areas. Things you may not have thought about yet that are very important to the way in which you and your organization operate ethically. The second, okay, it's coming. The second is how an organization can go about trying to develop a coda of ethics that will make it a superior organization in every capacity. So let's start. Okay. You ever work for this person? I really like this icon. Now, I want you to raise your hand. I want you to raise your hand if you've ever thought that you were smarter than the person you work for. Now, if you're sitting at a table with your boss, I ask your boss to turn slightly to the right or slightly to the left. But how many of you out there have worked for people that clearly aren't as developed intellectually as you? Okay. Oh, look at that. You're leaving me out here hanging, aren't you? I got a lady over here, a guy over here. Okay, good. I can understand why you don't do that. I'm not saying that's the ethical problem, but it's just important to note. Right. Let's talk about some individual differences that exist in society. First of all, most people believe or assume the following. One is that they act ethically. Work with people who don't think that? Walk around wearing some kind of scarlet letter saying no? In general, people think they're good people. Now, I spent on a mission of humanity, working 18 months in a maximum security prison, primarily with men who had committed murder. And if I talk to those men, particularly 10, 20, 30 years after that murder took place, they will invariably tell me the same thing. I'm a different person than I was then. I've spent the last 30 years trying to resurrect myself from those crimes. I don't want to be labeled just a murderer. Now, for all of you, that sounds like, well, this individual committed a heinous crime, they're deserving of punishment, and that is true, at least in my mind. But stop and think about the way in which we think about our own actions. So I'm going to give you something just for the men to answer here. All right? We'll do something just ladies' participation in a moment. Men, I'm going to give you a difficult circumstance. Oh, much more difficult than the ones that were just given to us. Your wife walks in the room wearing a new pair of jeans. Okay. She says to you, do I look hippie in these pair of jeans? Men, what's the answer to that question? No. I heard somebody say yes. I'm not going to ask how many times he's been married, but I'm going to guess a lot, okay? So if I were to say to you that my wife asked me, and she does all the time, how do I look in this? And I always say, you look more beautiful than the day I met you. She does. But more beautiful than the day I met you, she doesn't go, liar. Okay? Now, we've been married 30 years, so my guess is when she was 24, when we got married, she probably was more beautiful at that stage, right? You would just expect that after 30 years. However, I don't wear something around my neck that says liar. Okay? Is it a white lie? Some people say, well, it's just a little white lie. And I go, So in other words, lying has gradations. How about murder? Does murder have gradations as well? Okay. Well, we'll probably not get to that part. Secondly, everyone thinks we share their ethical values. And why wouldn't they think that? Do you remember when your parents, when you were young at home, my father had two things he told us always. And I think these were the greatest understanding of ethical values I learned from my dad. One was, when you open the refrigerator, get what you want and close it quickly. And when you open the front door in the severe heat or the severe cold, let people in or go out, but don't leave that door open for long. Now, I have no idea exactly why my father felt that was important, but when I had children, I remember very well telling my first child at 5, why don't you open the door, take a picture of the inside, shut it, come back, develop that picture, and then pick out what you want, reopen it, go in and get it. I don't know much about the physics of how much air we let out on either of those occasions, but I can tell you that I use the same things with my son unthinkingly. The same thing about faith. For many of us, we think our faith values come from a faith tradition, and they do. But those values are such that other faiths and other perspectives think differently about them. But I'm sure you weren't raised in a church, if you did go to church, where they said, and you know what, this don't kill thing, it's kind of a give or take thing, right? Or come to church on a regular basis, or love your neighbor. I don't know. If you feel like it, that's okay with us. It was truth. It was delivered truth from a Godhead. So for the most part, most of us believe that this clicker will work. Okay? That their ethics are formed by family and faith. Now, for some of you, you'll say to me, well, I wasn't raised with my father or mother, or either, or I wasn't raised in a particularly religious home. Even then, you're being driven by that. You're being driven by that because the larger society is still giving you values associated with that. All right, third. I apologize, last, okay, for this slide. You're not getting out that easy. I got 50 minutes up here. You know, I had a group of students say to me once, Dr. Hill, I really love your class, but unless you're Bruce Springsteen, we're getting out of here at 9, okay? So I'm going to go the same thing here. I know you're getting out of here at 1 o'clock. Most people have a hierarchy of ethics, which means that some things trump other things, right? So you value your wife or husband's perspective of themselves and their sense of being attractive much more than telling a little white lie, correct? So does that mean that you believe lying is good? No, it just means you have a hierarchy of values. My favorite holiday movie is A Christmas Carol. Do you like A Christmas Carol? What a beautiful story. The best Christmas Carol ever, George C. Scott. No kidding, 1984. Alistair Sims, second place. Okay? In it, there is a man, remember when they go under the tunnel, and there's a man there, and he had some potatoes for his kids. The family is living underneath a tunnel, and he's giving potatoes to his kids. And the young daughter says, "Where did you get them?" And he says, "I didn't steal them, if that's what you think it is." How many of you would let your children starve versus going to a local supermarket and trying to put something in your pockets? Now, you probably normally don't go into the local supermarket and say, "I'm going to stuff my pockets full of things." But under those circumstances, you might. And this hierarchy leads us to more problems than it solves. And I think that's true in lots and lots of organizations I've worked with over time. Okay, I want to get to the second one. I know it looks like a menorah. It wasn't supposed to. It was supposed to look like an organizational chart. It's not the worst one. We'll get to one where I really need to explain it. Okay. All organizations have cultures, don't they? When you walked in the first time to the firm that you're in now, you had to look around and think about the various nuances of exploring that place. We have a culture here at OK Ethics. We were talking about it. How are your ethics today? They're okay. No, we're not like that. I think we should call ourselves above average ethics, but that's a separate issue. Okay? Every organization has a culture. And when you go into that culture, you find out what that is all about. Right? Sometimes they're good things, sometimes they're bad things. Sometimes you barely recognize its effect on the way you behave. Many of my students graduate, they end up in New York City, and they find that they're told, "Yeah, we work 9 to 5 here. Everyone's in at 7, no one leaves until 9 o'clock. And they go, "Well, what does that mean?" And I go, "What do you think it means?" "It means I need to be here at 7 and stay until 9. Yes, it does. Not written down, 40-hour weeks, but you know, you're in the big 4 accounting firms, it's tax season. God love you. Okay? Second, the formal rules and informal rules sometimes differ. And this is where we can often get into trouble. The formal rules say, always do this. The informal rules say, be successful. I was consulting for a very, very large firm, and I guess this might sound negative, so I won't say who they are. They basically started a unit of about $250 million, so it's a multi-billion-dollar firm. And they said, we're going to run it on a whole new premise. You know, it's going to be that entrepreneurial, go-getting kind of place to get things done. And I said, that's wonderful. How did you change the goal structure so that it can do that? And they go, oh, well, we didn't do any of that. And I go, no, I mean, this is a new organization with new expectations, et cetera. What's the culture going to be like in it? And he goes, oh, exactly like the major firm. And I go, then how do you expect it to operate that way? Well, we just hope they can get it done and operate that way. So in other words, the informal rules weren't going to allow this formal new process to work. You know, pressure to perform can oftentimes outweigh pressure to conform, right? So how many of you, when the economic downturns happen, your boss came to you and said, look, sales are going to be down at least a third, so therefore we don't expect nearly as much as we did last quarter. Anybody? Anybody have your boss come to you and say, we're going to all do less and we're going to be proud of each other for it? Because this is the way organizations are supposed to go. I'm going to draw a graph for you. Just follow the bouncing finger. Anybody have a sales profile in your firm that goes? Reminds me of a country song. It's the crooked road that took me straight to you. Nobody has that. So what happens when that occurs? What does your boss tell you? Nobody's buying. We're in a downturn. Even our most precious customers are telling us, we may have to drop you. And the expectations are still. So what do you do? People ask me all the time, how can you predict when there's going to be more ethical problems? And I go, pretty easy. I just watch the way in which the world's going. When things are good, everybody's doing well. When the downturn happens and the pressure is on to perform, people stop conforming to the ethical principles, or they leave. And where do you go? You know, this thing on leadership and followership is one of the most important things I can tell you. We train people at our university, Villanova, and I'm also teaching at the University of Maryland in College Park, and I love all my new universities that I've met in here. Thank you all so much for being here. But we train people to be leaders, don't we? In my MBA program, we don't say, we expect you someday to sit in the back, to hold on to your ideas, and be led by the nose by the people around you. Nobody does that in an educational environment. We teach them strategic planning. Why? Because you ought to know how to run the organization at the very top. Okay? So what we do is we instill leadership. The problem with leadership is it only works if there are followers. Right? You ever been a leader in an organization where everybody wanted to lead? That is a dysfunctional place. Okay? I don't even like to go on vacation with friends that all think that they know what we ought to be doing, much less be in an organization like that. Followership is an important role in life because followership suggests that at some level we buy into what the leader has to offer, and it requires the leader to think beyond themselves. We'll get back to it. So differences. All right, I could spend a week on this. And you're going, people are holding their breath, but I promise I won't. I'll spend just a couple of minutes on it. But I am telling you, from the baby boom generation that I'm part of, remember, any baby boomers in here, don't trust anyone over 30, and then we became 30, and then we became 40, and then we became 50, and then we started saying things like, 60's the new 40. I know 40-year-olds, they don't want us. And they don't want to be 20 again. That's the one thing. Can't we all agree on it? Who'd want to be 20? And young people, God love you. But for the rest of us, 20 was a difficult decade. But here we are. We're looking at generations, and they are incredibly unique. Now, remember that the baby boom generation was raised with this giant bit of humanity. Do you remember we used to go up to the worst possible jobs and line up 15 deep, hoping someone would hire us? Universities were incredibly competitive at the time, but they expanded their doors for all of us, thank God. Okay. And so we eventually found our way through. Yes, we grew our hair long and we didn't bathe, but eventually we realized that we couldn't live like our parents that way, so we cut our hair, we took a bath, and we actually went to work. Now, our biggest fear in life, however, was raising children the way we were raised. Because we didn't trust our parents and we didn't trust society. I mean, I would go out for a baseball team, they'd line me up, they'd throw a couple of pitches at me. If I didn't hit them, they'd go, bye. And I'm 10 years old or 9 years old. Yes, did it harm my self-esteem? Maybe a little, okay? But for the most part, I survived it. Well, what did we do with Gen X? I'm sorry, Gen Y and Gen Z? Gen X, I apologize, I'm not going to talk about you, but then no one does. At any rate, we just skip over Gen X. Isn't it horrible? I mean, to be Gen X, any rate, Gen Y and Gen Z, here's what we did with Gen Y. We said, we're so fearful of hurting your self-esteem that we're not even going to throw a baseball at you. God forbid we throw a ball. We're going to take a long rubber hose. We're going to stick the ball on the top of it so it's suspended in air. And then we're going to give you a bat and tell you to hit it as hard as you can. And then, when you miss it anyway, I mean, it's sitting there right at the end of a tube. When you miss it anyway, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say, good swing. Now, that's learning. Yeah, I got a lot of learning out of that. And you're all going to get a trophy. Why? Because it's all meaningless in the end. Now, you have a whole generation raised like this. This doesn't mean they're not good people. Gen Y will inherit the earth. They are an incredible generation of young people. But they have certain qualities that are going to make them more difficult to manage, particularly in an ethical environment. One, they believe input's output. They'll say things like, well, I really worked hard on that. That should count. Two, okay, yeah, that's true. Two, they were raised to believe that they benchmark against themselves, not other people. They don't look around and say, I got to be as good as everybody else. They look around and say, I should get a raise of everybody else or the promotion of everybody else. But they are basically spending their time chasing skills on an individual mission. And if you go $15 higher to the left or $20 higher to the right, they believe it's their right to be able to change. The third thing about Generation Y that you need to know is they believe from the very, very beginning, not that they're entitled to things, but that they will come to them. In fact, when we studied them at the university level, we often found that they believe by the age of 35, they will have virtually it all. Income, prestige, position, etc., that some of you, including me at nearly 60, are still aspiring to have. Now, the good news is they'll work all the time. The bad news is they don't have any differentiation between public and private, personal and professional. So when you get somebody at your job and you say, what are you doing? I spent the last hour, navigating the web. My brother's getting married this weekend. I'm trying to find or next weekend, I'm trying to find something to wear. You'll go, aren't you at work? Of course I'm at work. Okay? I happen to be sitting here right now. I'd like to telecommunicate. Can I telecommute? That would probably be easier. Then I go right from my bed. Okay? The important part about this generation to keep in mind is they don't differentiate. The good news is you can have them at work until 2 in the morning. I mean, they will work and work and work and work and work. The bad news is they'll go from personal to professional, professional to personal, personal to professional. Okay, it's the first generation really not to see the difference. I could get to Generation Z, but it would take forever. The only thing I want to tell you is, you know that cell phone that never leaves the hands of Y? Okay, it actually, skin is morphing over that in Z. It's actually becoming part of their appendages so that they never are separated from them. All right, across races. We did a study recently that looked at, with one of my African American colleagues, that looked at whether or not we're in a post-racial society. Many of us believe we are. We believe the election of President Obama has changed things. But guess what? In our work, we found exactly the opposite. We found Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans, and African Americans believe there is significant discrimination in the marketplace that continues today. But white Americans, someone referred to me as a Caucasian in this particular group. I wasn't exactly sure what that meant, but I said I'm an all-occasion Caucasian. At any rate, called me a Caucasian, and I said, well, what do they think? They believe that we are in a post-racial society. That if anything is happening, people who are part of that majority are now being discriminated against more. This is going to have effect on the way in which people operate. Between genders, I'm assuming there are two. Okay, between genders. Now, I am not talking about men versus women. Okay? I could talk about that, but I'm not. What I'm talking about is male versus female. I know some women that are more male than any man I've ever been around, and I know some men that are as feminine as any woman I've ever met. And I don't mean that in any kind of stereotypical sense. I mean it in terms of a particular way in which you view the world. Men are supposed to be dominant, competitive, and want to lead. So when you typically have a male student in the classroom and you ask them a question, they go, well, I believe. But when you talk to someone more feminine in the classroom, they'll go, well, I'm unsure that everybody will agree, but this is how I think. It's a very different way of approaching things, right? One is, I'm going to dominate, hit something on the head, drag it by the tail, and take it back and eat it. Okay? The second is, well, if we're going to hit someone over the head, I guess I'm as good as anybody, to be dragged back to the cave and to be eaten. All right? One is much more communal than the others. These two groups think enormously differently when it comes to ethical values. And then socioeconomic class. Do you know what group in our society takes the very, very poor and is hardest on them and holds them, is more likely to hold them individually responsible for their poverty? It's not the really wealthy. It's the people one step up who had to fight hard to bring themselves out of poverty. They are success stories. They may be making $30,000 or $40,000 a year as a family income, but they're much harder on the poor than anybody else. If you look across the way in which our society, our income is spread, and I'll be happy to send you a video that shows you if it were 100 people what it would look like, we have so much incredible disparity. 1 in every 2 minority children in this country will spend at least some portion of their life in poverty. And by the year 2020, the state of Texas, which if you look through, I was told once when I was here for lunch, if you look down one of these windows, you can see all the way to Texas. And I asked, well, why would you look that way? But at any rate, it's a joke, but the people at this side of the table that are closer, they're not happy with it. But at any rate, my point is in Texas in 2020, okay, what was the majority will become the minority. California, that ship has already sailed. Okay? So we're looking at a very different world. All right, let's move forward. So when you think about how ethics are determined in an organization, really the number one way in which it's done is we have no process at all. In other words, we haven't even really thought about it. And that doesn't mean the organization's always small. Yes, smaller organizations are less likely to come up with a formal coda of ethics. But I can tell you I lived in the Silicon Rainforest for 7 years, Portland, Oregon. Silicon Rainforest, yeah. Go mighty ducks, beavers, you know, all kinds of animals that are used to getting rained on. Okay. I grew up in Washington, D.C. It was a different world. But at any rate, I talked to people from Microsoft. I worked closely with people from Intel. And they would tell me, we started out, we thought we weren't going to make it. When we made it enough, we were so fearful of people on our heels that we just fought and fought and fought and worked and worked and worked. By the time we got big enough to be noticed by everybody, we were still fearful that somebody would catch us. And so we did everything we could to squash the competition. And it took them literally until they grew up and someone pointed it out to them that they were successful. And then it was time to think about this. When I lived there, Microsoft gave less money to charities in and around their community than small locally owned banks. I'm talking in absolute dollars. Okay? Until Bill Gates got married, he didn't even think about a Bill Gates Foundation. It was Melinda. It should be Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation because she's the one that pushed him in first to give her money to do. Okay, so that's the dominant process. Legal compliance is the next one. And legal compliance is always driven by fear. Never forget that. When your lawyers are involved, typically what they're looking at is trying to reduce the liability of the firm. So I don't know how many of you run or enter these 10Ks or whatever Ks they could be. I do a lot of cycling. I was in a 100-mile ride not long ago, and I had to sign away everything, my kidneys, my organs. If anything happens to me, it's not your fault. If your truck runs me over, it's not your fault. All they're doing is trying to reduce their liability. So when organizations concentrate on compliance, okay, from a legal perspective, what they're doing is they're coming from a place of fear. Well, we got the next one. Top-down is what most of us are used to thinking. When an organization starts thinking ethically, usually it says, the people at the top know best. And in some instances, that could be true. They're at that 30,000 feet level, so they can look down on what's going on and come up with ways in which to think about the way in which we should behave, right? The problem is it's a lack of trust. It makes the assumption that the people who aren't on the ground doing the kinds of work most of us know has to happen day to day for us to be successful, really don't know and really couldn't come up with a coda. It means that we in the elite suite are more likely to be able to understand that. Now, if that elite suite still is filled with people who are on the ground on a regular basis, represents the multicultural nature of the organization and your customers, that might just work. But in general, it's not true. Now, my recommendation is a bottom-up strategy, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. And this is a risky strategy because you don't know what you're going to get. You really don't. You're asking people at the very bottom of your hierarchy in your organization to begin at their level telling you what is right and what is wrong. But all I know is the people I've met in places like restaurants, you know, if you really want to know what's going on in a restaurant, do you go to the manager or the owner? No, I asked the woman that comes to this table. You know, I went to a sushi bar recently. That was a bar and it had sushi. Okay, a sushi bar recently. And in that bar, I walked over to the men who, interestingly, were Chinese, who were making the sushi. And I said to them, what's fresh and good today? And they said, oh, if I were eating it, this is what I would eat. I didn't ask the person who was the manager. I went to them. So they're on the ground. They know what's going on. It's risky because if you allow them the opportunity to develop the strategy, let me tell you, they're going to tell you. And you may not like what you hear. So here's where we are. I wanted to add this individualism and relativism because it's important. For many of you, you know we live in an individualistic culture. I'm proud of that. I'm proud of the fact that when I was in high school, I looked around at my friends and I said, I know how you all are acting. It doesn't matter to me. My father told me one thing when I went to an expensive college preparatory school. He said, your job is to get A's. And I said, yes, sir. And he goes, and if you want to play sports, you got to get all A's. Now, that was a difficult thing to say, but I got all A's, and let me tell you, that was the greatest jump start in my career as an academic, to have to follow that. So I don't mind being in an individualistic culture. I know Asian cultures have collectivist cultures, and they have value too. I'm not suggesting they don't. But I am telling you, in our individualistic culture, we've seen a titanic shift towards relativism. I'm not suggesting that we don't embrace variety of cultures, so don't misunderstand me. But when I talk to my Muslim friends and my Hindu friends and my Jewish friends and my Catholic friends and my variety of friends, none of them says, you know what, our culture says we should kill lots of people and ignore God. They all have basically the same set of principles. Okay? What I'm talking about is our fear of standing up for what we believe to be right. I happen to be in a Christian university, and I can invoke God every day if I choose to do that. I saw in Maryland, they've now eliminated any discussion of holidays because they've been pushed by various groups to discuss their holidays as well. I don't see a problem with that, but I sure see a problem when we have a holiday tree, and then we have to take out the holiday tree because it appears unequal. You cannot deny your own values day to day in important places and still live them. All right, now I've gotten to the one, this works on its own mind. So this is the one I wanted to tell you about. That is a rock, okay? It's supposed to be the thinker. Not that you can't do a lot of thinking on what you thought it was, okay? My understanding is most men, my father's generation, this is where great thoughts occurred, okay? I was recommending more fiber than that, but who knows? Okay, here's where I want you to start. You start at the beginning and at the individual level. People never do that. But you gotta start at the beginning, and you have to help people develop guides to their personal and professional lives. Now you can say, personal lives? We don't need to do that. We're Tony Soprano, you know, at home we do X, and at work we do Y. And I'm sure my father felt that way, and many men in his generation felt that way. But not anymore. To some extent X, but clearly Y and Z, these generations, they don't differentiate personal from professional. They live one life, and they're going to more likely live a fully integrated life, and in some respects, a better life, particularly among the women in their generation. You know, the attempt of so many women in my generation and X generation to try to somehow separate those two and do it all, you know, was horrific. They don't think that way. Well, we got there. Maybe I'll put this down. What I ask people to do is to develop their own individual 10 commandments. This is not an easy task. I don't start with the 10 commandments, though people like to use a lot of thus and theirs. You know, in there, I thus won't do this, that, okay? I don't know what English that was, but I'm talking about a set of simple principles that you will hold yourself accountable for. That you will hold yourself accountable for. I've had hundreds of students and executives write this down, put it on something the size of a business card, and keep it in their wallet. Because whenever they get that feeling in their gut that something's wrong, they pull it out and they read it. And it reinforces their values. Now, it sounds like this is pretty easy. Finding 10 is not. It's not easy. And finding 10 that are mutually exclusive but collectively exhaustive, yes, you did learn something in statistics. Mutually exclusive means they differ. Collectively exhaustive means they're everything. You can't come up with a situation that wouldn't be found there. Okay? The difficult part of this is so many of us, well, I'm going to go with this, it'll have both prohibitions and it'll have responsibilities. The Bible says, and I've tried to read every version I can of the 10 Commandments, the Bible says, thou shalt not kill. I'll make it simpler. Don't kill. It doesn't say, yeah, but, you know, there's certain, I mean, if it really pisses you off, I'm sorry. That is more than 4 letters. You'll tell Shannon that later, right? If they really anger you on the street where I come from, the Schuylkill is a special road. If somebody wants to get over in that lane and hook over at the very end, you'd rather die than let them in, right? Okay? Welcome to Philadelphia. It's prohibitions and things you should do. Both prohibitions and things you should do. Now, here it says moderators and contradictions. Moderators have to look at things and say, well, is that possible? So I'll get all the time, never lie. Well, let me back up. Sometimes I'll get, I won't kill. All right, well, you're a school teacher. I guess that's okay. But if that's not really part of your work assignment, it's no need to be able to talk about it. It is important to talk about things like lying. People do it all the time. I will not lie. I go, really? Ever? Ever, ever? I go, well, I won't lie about X. And I go, okay, but you will lie sometimes, right? And they'll say, well, what do you mean by lying? Telling an untruth. Well, that's a pretty strict standard, especially because I'm in sales. And I say, I'm not making these up for you, you're making them up for you. Well, okay. So I walk them through them and I'll say, that's just not tangible. That can't work. That's what moderators do. And we really work to get these down. We hone them down to their essence. Okay, we've moved on again, so let me move on again. I'm being timed out of here, aren't I? Okay. It's okay, I'm being paid by the hour. It could stay forever. Now it won't move when I'm actually asking it to move. Okay. At the next level in the organization, we take all these people together that have tried to come up with their own 10 commandments, and we put them together in work teams and say, can you come up with consensus? Boy, imagine people sitting around a table like this, you're the work team, and everybody pulls out their 10 commandments and thinks, I have the gospel in front of me, and everyone's going to agree, and they look and they go, say, what? To the person next to them? This can't be true. And now they've got to come up with a set that they will all agree on and publicly put them out in front of their work product. Someone said to me, had Anderson done this or Enron done this, would they never have had those kinds of problems? I don't know, but it would have given them pause. It would have given them pause. Because once you put them up there as a work team, you now have the obligation to hold each other accountable. And guess what? When people are doing things they know in their heart is wrong, when they're doing that, in many cases they want somebody to help them do the right thing. You pretty much know, right? You can feel it in your gut. Now we've codified it, you put it in writing, and now we've codified it as a community, and we've got it in writing, and I'm looking right at it. And I decide, I can't do that. Okay. We limit it to peers. It shouldn't be people who are on various levels in an organization, because just like you wouldn't raise your hand, although silently now, raise your hand if you're smarter than your boss. Okay. Just give me one of these once in a while. I'll be looking around to check you out. Just like when you're with your boss today, it becomes much more difficult when you're at various hierarchies. So it should be people who are at the same peer level. Now, once you've been able to do that, you've come together as peers and figured out what your work team should do. The guiding principle is taking a systemic view. Now, an individual view is all 10 of mine should be the 10 that drive us. No, a systemic view is we are all functioning as a team, but we may have different things we have to do in order to get this teamwork done. So I'm going to think larger than myself. This is an ethical value in and of itself, to think beyond the individual to the collective good. All right. And the outcome is something you would put in front of everybody. Okay, next. People will ask me, what do you do with it then? The idea then is to keep moving through the organization, higher and higher in the organization. And I've written it down as an entire plan. Shannon can get to paper to you. You're welcome to it. You can ask me any questions you want about making it work. I know it looks hard. It is hard, okay? But it works. So as each team gets together, representatives of the teams come out and they work together to try to build consensus on another set of 10 guiding principles across various work teams. And slowly over time, this builds up through the organization, up into the highest levels. In other words, it starts at the bottom and it moves higher and higher in the organization. How long that takes depends upon the unit. For the most part, though, I would tell you, if you are a standalone operating unit, you should do it within that unit versus 20 different subgroups or organizations within a particular corporate umbrella and trying to make it work for everybody. So the smaller the unit, the better you are, and it's easier to get done. But you continue to work through the hierarchy. Okay? You need to choose people as you move up who are not the individuals who most want to get in front of the conversation, but they are the individuals who are most interested in serving the larger organization. And they get together, and they work together, and they report back to the teams on a regular basis. So this work team might choose you, and you work with a team over here, and it's this individual, and then working across groups. It may be, if we took these 5 or 6 tables here, you would each send one individual in who would again begin negotiating it. Now, part of it comes across as wordsmithing, but in the beginning, what organizations need to do is they need to decide what are the commonalities across these work teams? What are the areas of real disagreement where no one thought these would be appropriate? And how can we come together in ways that take your idea and your idea on a similar kind of issue and merge them in a statement that's simple enough for everybody to be able to follow? And we continue to move up the organization. I should probably just let it do what it's doing, but. Okay, the board endorsement. Once the organization has worked from the bottom all the way to the top, it's very important to get in front of another group, and if you have a board, that's the best way. To get in front of that board and say, we have developed a code of ethics that has included everybody along the way. And what we want to be able to do is to get the board to approve it, and we want to place this publicly so that all the stakeholders of our organization can look at it and can recognize these are the guiding values, the guiding ethical principles for who we are. I say leader-member exchange theory because it must mean that the leaders of the organization as the board have respect for the members of the organization who work there on a regular basis. This is why a lot of boards that are that are kept away from the main flow of the organization oftentimes have difficulty dealing with that. Okay? But now they get a chance to look at that. There should be only a handful of people who present this coda to them, and they should be individuals who have bubbled up from this process who really seem like they're the kinds of individuals who can come at this with passion and can be representative of every level in the organization. It's not enough to assume that as we move up, now the senior management can present the ideas. In order to get buy-in from every level of the organization must be represented at this level. The important part for that group when they get there is to concentrate on what are the key points that we're trying to get across. What are the underlying values and coda that we want people to agree upon at the end of the day? And the voices of every member of the firm need to be heard. Now, I want to go to these questions and I want to answer them for you. So people will ask me, why build a code? I have 4 minutes. Why build a code? A lot of organizations say if we don't build a code, we could get into trouble, and it's true. We've actually looked at organizations without codes, and we found out they're much more likely to get in trouble than organizations with one. But if that's the only thing that's driving you, then you have a lower level of what we think of as moral intelligence. The reason that we have a code is because we are moral individuals who want to live ethical lives. And that's why we do it. And we want that to be reflected of our organizational life. I don't think there's a person sitting here today who says to me, I don't really care if my firm is motivated by higher order values. Okay? I just want to get paid at the end of the day. Don't we all want to know that we live fulfilled lives? And those fulfilled lives are, in our professional side, that we're doing something good in society. Who should be involved? The answer is everybody. It's a scary proposition, just like democracy is a scary proposition. I mean, I'm looking at some of the races in my state and going, how in the heck could they have picked these individuals? And my answer is, the people who voted picked these individuals. And therefore, that represents something. The value of the vote is the value of the vote here. If you've worked in organizations, it gives you a strategic plan, and in it has a set of values they want you to live by, and the first time you see them is when they hand you this packet, you might look at them, you might not look at them. But if they started at your level, and some of the ideas you gave them at that lowest level are inculcated in those values, you're more likely to follow them. The right steps for an organization like yours, I mean, really, honestly, the best thing you can do is you begin by getting higher level management fully supportive of the idea that we're going to build a code of ethics from the bottom up that's representative of the values of the people that are here. Anything else, even if it's a strong set, everybody looks at it in agreement, I have no buy-in. When do you start? Well, when most organizations come to me when they're in trouble. We're having real trouble, and so we need to do something. Wouldn't it be better to do it when you're not in trouble, so you have the luxury and the leisure of doing this right? Okay? I'm saying doing it now. I'm not asking for more consulting, but I'm telling you, do it now. And again, I've got a code for you. You can figure it out on your own, but you can ask me questions along the way. Okay. And I got a last one here. I know I do. How do we ensure we do it right? Just asking that question, just being aware of that question, means you will watch it over and over and over again. You know, the one thing that I've learned in my 60 years of life, more than anything else that I've learned, is that when I come to people with God's love, when I come to people with the unending love that God gives to everybody, and I look at them in the eyes through that love, it changes the world. It completely changes the world. And so all I'm asking, if you want to ensure you do it right, look through your eyes at everyone knowing that they are deserving of your love. You know, if you can't look through God's eyes, if that's an uncomfortable place for you, I always tell people, I've worked with a lot of managers and I've talked to them about, how do you fire somebody? So I'll end with how you fire somebody. I mean, how many of you have fired somebody in your life? Okay? I mean, it's kind of like a date, you're breaking up with somebody and you're going, well, you know, he's not that bad, he did shower this week, you know, and you know, he only stepped on my feet 6 times when we were dancing. Well, you're trying to figure it out, you know, but you know in your heart it's time to let it go, you gotta let it go. But most managers will say to me, but you know, it's a heart-wrenching environment, and they said, what should I do? And I said, you can hold people accountable. Fire them the way you would want your mother to be fired. I go, whoa, I don't want my mother to be fired. Yeah, but she's got to get fired. We got to can the lady, okay? We got to can her. Now given mama's out of the house, what are you going to do? All right, I thank you so much. I want to leave you only with one thing. Values don't happen on their own. They're an exploration and they're a journey. And I know that you've already started that journey because your ethics are okay. But let's make them great. Thank you.
real quick. I know everybody's rushing out of here. I've got 4 things I got to tell you. First of all, videos are online, so if you want to take this and share it with individuals for staff meetings, please do. Photos over here at the steps, and feel free to go on up there and he'll help you out. CPEs will be in the back of the room. I want to ask the volunteers that we named off if you could come to the front of the room. We'd like to personally, Todd and Shannon and I would like to personally thank you. And last but not least, we're not going to have a meeting next month, so I'm going to wish you Happy Thanksgiving, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, all of those, all of the above. But we will resume in January, and this information is in your agenda. I hope you'll join us, Ethics on Trial. Thank you for coming.